Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Mind interview series where we talk to real people just like you who are doing their best to be their best. And right now, I have with me a good friend, Megan, who is calling in from Nashville, a very new place for her these days. Megan, I'm so happy to have you here. We always like to start with a really quick question, which is we'd love to hear your story. Who are you?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Lissy. It's so good to see you. And yes, I mean, I am in Nashville here or now, but how did I get here? Well, I too am in the mental health space. I'm a therapist and executive coach. I have a master's in counseling psychology and I've been working in the field for close to 2 decades now. And I became interested in mental health because, unshockingly, I was struggling myself. I struggled with eating disorders and depression and anxiety from a fairly young age. Also had like some family turmoil and whatnot. Those things I would imagine are interrelated. And when I was in my teens, I got really into psychology. And I was like, I know that I want to be a therapist when I grow up, which I actually knew at, I think, even when I was not in my teens. But I know it's very unusual for people to kind of like know what they want to be when they grow up at that time. But that's like the one thing in life I've been like very decisive about. Everything else has taken a lot of indecision. But so anyway, so I went off and, did my undergrad in psychology and I did my master's in psychology. But the irony is that while I was doing those like 7 years straight of school and like kind of like doing everything right, I suppose, I was still really suffering. I had thought that if I studied enough, and graduated from the prestigious programs, I would somehow heal myself. But my journey with my mental health just kind of like took different shapes and morphed from like bulimia to orthorexia and, various different other ways of essentially avoiding my emotional experience. And that's really what I see through the lens of perfectionism when I work with clients. So I specialize in perfectionism and what I describe as kind of perfectionism related manifestations or concerns. So I actually see things like anxiety, depression, disordered eating, addictions, really any of that is kind of falling under this lens of trying to avoid our emotional experience. And I see that as there are ways that we do that. If you're familiar with IFS, which is internal family systems, there are ways that we do that that are sort of like the managers where we sort of avoid any type of triggering situation that might leave us vulnerable to emotions. And then there are the situations where we have the firefighters, which are kind of the response to those triggering situations where we actually are feeling the emotion, but we try to numb it as quickly as possible. So that was sort of my journey. And ultimately, I had some great things happen to me that at the time did not feel great. When I was in my early 20s, I was dating the man that I thought I was going to marry. And I, at that time, was like finishing my master's. I was also still deeply in disordered eating. I had been over exercising so much that to the point at which my physical therapist said I could not exercise anymore or else I would like destroy my body. But he did recommend yoga. And so what happened was, around that time, this love of my life, or so I thought, dumped me, what felt like out of nowhere. And it was shattering to me because in my story growing up, my dad had left my mom for someone who was much younger, and I'd watched my mom sort of fall apart. So when my dad left, my mom kind of left too emotionally. And I was so terrified of having that experience happen to me. So I'd really tried to live my life in a way that I thought I could control. All right, I can prevent people from, leaving me. I can prevent being hurt. I can prevent being rejected, any of that kind of thing. And so when that person broke up with me, although it was shattering, it was actually the best thing that ever happened to me because none of my emotional avoidance sort of mechanisms worked in that sense. I had to finally go into the pain and the grief and learn how to feel my emotions. And right at that same time, I was also doing yoga begrudgingly. I didn't like it, but I was doing it to try to heal my broken body and because it was the only movement I could do. So the combination of those couple of things and then sort of falling into more Buddhist philosophy and yogic philosophy, I started to recognize, oh, wow, like this whole time, even though I've done this master's in psychology, I haven't really understood that so much of what I'm doing is about trying to avoid my difficult emotions. And that's actually, today I work with entrepreneurs, executives, high achievers, and, whether they're wanting to heal from some sort of what we might perceive as an addiction or unhelpful tendency or behavior, or whether it's just that they're, afraid of fundraising or taking a risk or they're micromanaging or they're people pleasing or whatever it is, so much of it really comes back to emotional avoidance. So just to fast forward the rest of my story there, ultimately I ended up working at a college. I was living in British Columbia, Canada at the time, in Vancouver, and I was working at a college and that was an amazing job and I loved it. I was working with the students, a lot of stuff around like anxiety, depression, relationship issues. But after a few years, I realized I was like, oh, like I'm telling people to step out of their comfort zones and helping them like do these things to overcome the perfectionism that set the root of what's holding them back or causing them suffering. But I'm not really walking the walk because I was like living with a different boyfriend at that time and like, playing soccer 3 times a week and hanging out with all my friends that I'd grown up with in the small town in British Columbia that I'm from. So I had an opportunity to move to New York and I didn't know anyone in that city. But I knew that I loved New York. I'd visited there and I just felt like, wow, this is just where I'm supposed to be. I can't explain it, but like I just connect to the energy. And so I'd met someone at a conference because I'd had some articles at the time. I'd been writing a blog and had some articles with this publication, Mind Body Green, if you're familiar with it, that had like millions of views. So basically someone sort of like offered me a job on the spot. I was like, I'll take it because I'm Canadian and I like need someone to sponsor my visa. I was like, I just need to get to New York. So I cashed out my 401k, or what we call in Canada, my pension. And I didn't know a single person. I moved with one suitcase and I went to New York City. I left my like amazing job, which was, faculty position at this college. And that was in 2015. And for the next almost 10 years, I kind of like just like hustled. I started at this startup that was also a great experience because I got more insight into startup culture and really working with entrepreneurs, which ultimately became my bread and butter. But for the next, like almost 10 years, I just sort of hustled and by any means necessary, like starting out seeing clients for $60 an hour out of a coffee shop for cash, like things along those lines. And ultimately had some really wonderful things happen along the way. I got a podcast with Forbes, which ultimately now is no longer with them, still my own podcast, but I still write for Forbes. I've had incredible clients over the years. I've done a lot of speaking for entrepreneur organization. And ultimately now I just help people really kind of understand and recognize where that emotional avoidance is holding them back from the success and happiness that they're looking for. That's the abridged version. We could go into a lot more, but there you go.
Well, I have so many follow-up questions for you, but first off, like so incredible that you have that that you've been on such an intense journey and you consistently were willing to like roll with it and evolve and look at yourself in those moments and say, okay, this is one of those moments where I have deeper work to do. I'm curious, like you talk about this idea of like feeling through the emotions or kind of like working through them. Like, what does that feel or look like? Like for people who are like, is that me? Um,
Well,
yeah,
I'll tell you this, Lizzie. That's everyone.
yeah,
We
yeah,
and myself included, by the way. Emotions are evolutionary, right? So the reason that we have our emotions, at least through evolutionary theory, is that they keep us alive. They keep us alive and they help us procreate. So in the same way that, we have all sorts of other functions that are for the purpose
yeah,
of survival and procreation, it's the same thing with our emotions. So they're what we call pro-social. They're meant to keep us in groups and they're meant to keep us alive. So in the same way that you might feel like anxiety, I don't know, couple 100,000 years ago, like on the savannah, if there's a predator, that's something that's supposed to protect you, right? Gives you the fight or flight response. We still feel that today. It's not always productive. If we feel anxiety, like walking down a dark alley at night, when we're trying to take a shortcut home from the bar, that's probably a healthy anxiety. We want to feel that. It's saying that's not right. If we're
mhm,
feeling anxiety, maybe like coming on a podcast and being like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling really anxious. Like I shouldn't do this. I've got to not do this thing. It's a threat. That's where we want to notice a little bit more and be like, okay, this means I care. This is a good thing. But also like I can still do the thing alongside the anxiety. So that's, anxiety maybe for that survival purpose, but other emotions such as loneliness, for example, it's uncomfortable, but it's meant to say, hey, you want to connect. That is going to be pro-social. It will protect you. It will help you get in on, whatever kill or food you need to get, and it will help you procreate,
yeah,
And so, really, all of our emotions, guilt is there to say, all right, there's a rupture that's occurred, in a relationship. You want to repair that in some way, right? Anger, a boundary has been crossed, or you've been mistreated, or you need to advocate for someone or something. Frustration, there's something in between a goal that you want to achieve and where you are today. Every single emotion has an evolutionary purpose. So the first thing that I try to help clients understand is that their emotions are not bad. Like they're not something that one should feel shame around or something that mean that they aren't like thinking positively enough or that they're not evolved enough or anything along those lines. Emotions are really like the price of being alive. I think that's a sort of butchered version of a Susan David quote, but
I
really
love
they're
that.
like we can't be here without our emotions. And as long as we live, no matter how much we meditate or exercise or read, no matter how evolved we are still going to feel depression at times or disappointment or frustration or anxiety, all of that. Because you know what? None of us is immune from grief or, things not going our way or how we expected. And so ultimately a big part of this work is accepting that like emotions are here to stay, and instead of trying to avoid them or try to live a life that prevents us from feeling anything, anything, we want to live a life or build a life that allows us to learn how to metabolize them, how to like move them
Love
through
that.
us and respond to them in healthier ways. So what happens is, because most people don't learn how to do this growing up and don't get this kind of education, when they feel an uncomfortable emotion, they both fear it or like don't like the feeling, which again, it's not supposed to be comfortable. It's meant to make us pay attention. So we do something about it because it's a
Yeah.
signal. So they'll either try to like avoid it or numb it in some way, like I was sharing earlier. And then what they also do is a lot of people will judge themselves for feeling emotions. So particularly things
Do
like
that.
sadness or anxiety, anger in some instances. It's what we call like the second arrow in Buddhism. Like the first arrow is
Oh,
already there and more
interesting.
painful. The second one's like you're
Yeah.
judging yourself. First steps are essentially understanding, all right, I'm having this difficult emotion. Like, I don't need to like run away from it. Like, let me get curious about it. And when we get curious about something, we're not judgmental. You can't be curious and judgmental at the same time. Trying to lick your elbow, you know, it's like, it's truly like, it's impossible. So trying to be curious, like, okay, what am I noticing right now? What are the sensations in my body? What am I feeling? So that's the first step, is just even the awareness of recognizing you're having an emotional experience. And what I do with clients who, again, don't have much experience with this is honestly give them like a emotional vocabulary or like a feelings vocabulary where they can go and reference that and be like, okay, on this like feelings wheel or on this like list of emotions, what kind of camp am I in here? Is this in like the anxious camp? Is this in the sad camp? Is this in the angry camp? And be able to label what that emotion is. The next piece, it's learning self-compassion. So a lot of us do not know how to speak to ourselves in a way that is kind and supportive. We maybe didn't grow up in environments where that was modeled for us or taught to us, or we internalized sort of a critical voice of, you know, whether it was a caregiver or honestly, just sometimes it's society in general, right? Like, look at us as women in this world. We walk through life constantly being told we're not enough. And so we internalize those voices. So a big part of being able to like metabolize those emotions or process those emotions is being able to sit with it, like I said, practicing some
Yes.
mindfulness essentially, which is that awareness without judgment and sort of accepting that this is not a bad thing that I'm having an emotion here. Maybe it's actually a signal that's trying to tell me something. And then saying something to yourself like, Megan or Lissy, it's understandable that you're feeling whatever the emotion is for whatever reason that you're feeling it, right? So maybe we can work with an example. Is there something you might be willing to share, Lissy, that's happened in the last
Yeah.
24 hours that maybe caused an emotional experience?
Yeah. I am not supposed to eat sugar very much, and it's the holidays, and sugar is everywhere. So I went to this holiday party. There was like bread and cookies everywhere, and I felt frustrated.
Yes. Okay. Beautiful example. Thank you for sharing. So there you are, you're at the holiday party and you're frustrated, right? And you might start noticing that frustration in your body. And frustration is such a hard feeling, right? Like, because it's just like you want to make it go away, but really, as I said earlier, it's there to signal that there's like a block between like where you are and where your goal is. And so
Yeah.
something that you might say to yourself in that moment is, Lissy, like sweetie or honey, or maybe give yourself a term of endearment. It's understandable you're feeling frustrated because you're not supposed to eat sugar, but there are so many delicious looking treats all over the place and you're surrounded by them and everyone else gets to eat them. And it's just not fair that like they all get to eat them and it's not going to affect them negatively, but like you have to just sit here and practice this discipline, like, which just is painful on so many levels and takes a lot of energy, and you don't get to enjoy in like all the deliciousness of the season. So what that does is it's not necessarily going to make the frustration go away, but it's going to give you like a little hug in that moment of frustration, and it's going to allow you to ride that frustration out a little bit longer. And that's essentially what we want to do whenever we have difficult emotions, is acknowledge it, give yourself some self-compassion, and then move into, all right, well, how do I want to self-soothe in this situation? Or, you know, in some cases, do I need to remove myself from the situation? Do I need to do something? What's the emotion telling me? Like, is there kind of an action step here? So in that instance, you know, maybe you want some validation. Maybe you're there with, you know, your boyfriend or a friend or whatever, and maybe you just need some validation. Like, and you just need to say, I'm just like so frustrated. I just really want to eat these things. They look delicious. And I'm just like really annoyed. And, you know, if you have an empathetic friend or boyfriend, they'll be like, yeah, that sucks. I'm so sorry. So that's, I guess, like, and you can ask me more questions about kind of the process
Yeah,
here, but that's
please.
sort of the first place in terms of how to metabolize or process those emotions and pay attention to them. And what that is going to allow people to do is not only support yourself in a way that you may not have been able to before, but it's going to allow you to be able to, rather than be at the mercy of those emotions and be more reactive using those like managers and firefighters on kind of an unconscious level, it's going to allow you to be more intentional and consciously respond to those emotions and be like, okay, I know what's happening here. I can see myself feeling irritated or frustrated or disappointed or sad or whatever it is. How do I want to respond to this? What's it telling me, and how do I want to respond to this in a way that is more effective?
Love it. I'm curious. We've got like a hard charging group here. So a lot of people who watch this podcast hang out with Mindy and talk about mental fitness are like the people who are like, I hear you, Megan. That might be cool for like my little sister or like somebody else. But like, what's a way for someone to practice this like level of self-soothing, self-compassion that might feel like, does it have to feel that kind of like warm? Because that's like, if someone's never done it before, especially for our community,
Totally.
like it might feel like extreme. So what's something that they could do that might feel a little more authentic for them?
Totally. No, I so
Yeah.
appreciate you saying that, Lucy, because yeah, for a lot of people, like being kind to themselves is very foreign. And
Yes,
they believe that if they
totally.
let go of that inner critic, then, and if we were working one-on-one, we'd explore like what are some of their fears around that? Is it that they believe that they need that critical inner voice to be able to achieve their
That's what we
goals?
hear.
Is it that they fear that, if they go soft, they're going to become like lazy and gain 100 pounds? Is it just that like they kind of judge anyone who talks to anyone in that way? And there may be more of that kind of like militant culture and whatnot. And ultimately, what I try to explain it as is I would imagine a hard charging group, there's probably a lot of athletes or former athletes in that. And any athlete will tell you, like, that they might recall a really good coach in their career. And a really good coach is similar to a really great leader. And if you were to look at it in sort of like this quadrant where we have on the x-axis like expectations, and if we have on the y-axis like support, where we want to be is in that top right corner. So we still want high expectations, but we also want
Love
high
that.
support. And what happens is when you have high expectations but low support, you create fear and paralysis. You create a culture of perfectionism and within yourself, but also a work culture or a team where people are afraid to make mistakes and step out of their comfort zone. So what I would, if I was working with someone who was like, I don't want to be nice to myself, like, why would I do that? I would remind them that, okay, this isn't about being like condoning bad behavior or like just allowing whatever goes. It's not about like permissive parenting. If you're familiar with parenting styles, it's about like
Yeah.
authoritative parenting. And so I also explain it as having like, there's a yin and a yang to compassion. So self-compassion has a yin and a yang. And what I mean by that is there's the yin that we're probably all familiar with, which is like tolerance and patience, as sympathy and empathy and forgiveness and warmth and like all those delicious things that feel really good. But there's also a yang, and yang energy is that more strong masculine energy. And what that means is like expectations, desire for growth, boundaries, respect, self-respect, all of that. And so really with self-compassion, we're trying to reparent ourselves in a way that maybe we weren't parented, or we're not parenting ourselves, we're not leading ourselves and others. And that means like, yes, you have sympathy and empathy and understanding, and like it makes sense of behavior or mistakes or failures or whatever, but you also like value growth, and you also
Yeah.
want that sort of like stronger boundaries, respect, discipline, all of that, right? So that's actually part of self-compassion, is that like stronger piece. And to give an example, like I was a soccer player and a tennis player, and the best coaches I had were the ones that still expected me to show up for practice. It's not like they're like, oh, yeah, you don't have to go to practice, but you can still play in the game. Or, oh, it's an early morning practice, so fine, you can sleep in. Like, no, like you're showing up, you're going to the game in like the pouring fucking rain when it's freezing cold outside. Like you're still playing, right?
Yeah.
Or there are times where, you don't play for a whole half and like you don't complain about it, right? And you run lines, like if, you're during practice, like you do the things that you don't want to do, and you, of course, try to get better. But like that same coach, if you're in the game and like you miss the PK, if you miss the penalty kick, they're not going to be like, you're a terrible player, you're off the team, you're a failure, I can't believe you did that. They're going to be like, okay, like you should have made that, right? I mean, most of the time we should make PKs, at least at the level I played at. I mean, I don't know about once you get to the World Cup, but like I think everyone can agree most of the time that you should be making that. But obviously people make mistakes. You miss the net, right? Like you go for something that's going to go in the corner, but you measure it or kind of aim it not in the right place, or you blow it over the crossbar or whatever. And ultimately, you don't want a coach who's going to be like, you should never try anymore because you're so bad at that. You should just quit soccer altogether. You want someone who's like, okay, look, cool. Yeah, you missed it. You know what? People make mistakes. They miss it. Like, here are the things you did well. And also, like, how can we learn from this? How can we grow?
Yeah.
Whenever I have a client, because I work with a lot of men and a lot of athletes, whenever they are like, ooh, like self-compassion, I will frame it a lot more in the way of like your inner coach who's going to allow that
But
growth mindset that makes you achieve your goals, but also is not going to keep you stuck in a place of shame, because really shame is what's at the root of so much of these like protective behaviors. And we want to be able to shift one's relationship to himself so that they're not always operating from a place of shame where they think they have to like do everything perfectly and look perfect and have the best moods and whatever to be lovable and worthy, but instead that they have room for, yeah, days where they feel a little depressed or their energy is not at 100%, or, making mistakes on their career path or doing
Yeah.
things that they, regret or whatever. I don't know if that's sort of what you were looking for, but yeah.
That's awesome. And by the way, what I was looking for and more, like so
Great.
helpful, so useful. Now, I'm gonna actually ask a question about you.
Sure.
I feel like, Megan, you are such a fantastic human, professional, and friend, and you're just kind of a badass. But I do want to ask you, like, I feel like if someone saw you today, they'd be like, this one, she has it all figured out. Like, I get that, like, maybe it was tough, whatever. Um, it'd be great to hear about a time when you just wanted to fucking quit. And like, what did you do?
Totally. Oh my gosh. I mean, do you mean personally or professionally? Because I think
Let's
I've been
talk
to
about
both.
both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, girl. I mean, it's funny. We were talking off air before this just about how much our lives have changed since we've seen each other. It's been a couple of years since we've seen each other in person, I think. I now, like today, I'm 38. I'm recently married in the last year. I live in a nice home with my husband and like we're hoping to get pregnant. We have a cat. Like things feel very, I don't know, I guess aligned with the script that many of us feel like we have to follow or want to follow. But, my life has been very unconventional up until this point. And there have been times, I mean, certainly, I mean, I'll start with my business. I mean,
Yeah.
I was very lucky in the sense that I had the privilege of like knowing that if I failed in New York and I couldn't make it there, I could go back with $0 and like show up on my mom's doorstep and be like, Mom, I need to stay with you for like a couple months or whatever until I get a job and get this stuff figured out. Like, I want to name that. I always think it's really important to name our privilege in that sense because not everybody has the privilege to take the same kinds of risks. So, but I will say, I mean, gosh, when I first moved to New York, I really struggled. I kind of wanted that. Like it was a little bit perverse because I was like, I wanted challenge and I wanted struggle. And I knew that was kind of like the next spiritual growth opportunity, right? Like I'd done the psychedelics, I'd done the Vipassana retreat, like I'd done the things where like, oh, I'm going to do this like check the box kind of thing to like test my emotional tolerance. But I knew I really had to walk the walk of being like, no, I'm going to like throw away everything that I know that gives me my sense of like the, master's degree therapist at the institution with all her friends and like playing on the teams and like, and I went to New York and I was, a nobody living in a shared apartment with like a stranger that I didn't know and definitely didn't get along with in like the middle of the winter. I moved to New York the end of January of 2015. And I had no idea what I was in for. And I was so lonely, Lissy. And oh my gosh, the startup I worked at was like nothing like what I expected. I mean, I think a lot of people have this experience, but it was like a wellness startup that told me they were democratizing wellness. And at the time, I didn't know that democratizing, like, insert whatever here, was just like something every startup says. So I, being like
Yeah.
the kind of more socialist Canadian, was like, amazing, like wellness. Yes, like we need to democratize it. Like it shouldn't be a privilege. And then I realized, oh, we're actually selling green juice to the 1%. And like, this is not a great culture here. And like, I'm feeling way underutilized in my skills. I was like kind of doing marketing, I guess, but it was something I didn't really know anything about. I mean, thankfully I had background in psychology, so I could kind of figure some of it out. But anyway, that's all to say that there were times where I remember like just crying in my shitty apartment that I didn't like, and like with the person that I did was not a great roommate, or I mean maybe they thought I wasn't either, but like we did not get along, and like I didn't know anyone. I had no friends. I mean, there are people that I kind of met through work, but like I really had no good
Yeah.
friends, right? I didn't know if there wasn't a single person where I could like go over to their house and like cry on their couch, right? Like I think that's a good litmus test for if you have
I
people in a
agree.
city where like I can go over here and I can just cry on your couch and like we can just like whatever. And so and at the time also like I was running out of money, right? Like I left the startup that I was working at so that I could ultimately just like lean into and do my own thing. And I was like hustling and like trying to kind of getting odd jobs. Like there was a time where, I mean, there was a guy that I knew and still know. And I don't know if you know this company, but it's called My Intent. And they like make these little bracelets where you like stamp a word in it. And you've probably seen them like a washer. It's a great idea. He's an awesome guy. But I remember he came to New York and he was like, hey, I'm like going to do a conference here. Do you want to come and like help me stamp bracelets for $20 an hour? And I was like, sure, I need the money, like, and like that was the state I was in. Like I was like $20 an hour, cool. Like I got to do it. Like I'll stamp bracelets for 8 hours.
Let's
Like,
go.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so it was rough and it was so cold. And like, I was just like, I don't think I'm going to make it here. Right. Like the money was dwindling and, somehow, I mean, gosh, like a combination of just like, again, all those sort of odd jobs and then starting to get clients and finally being like, okay, I guess I'm going to like start seeing clients, in across the world over Skype. I mean, this was before the pandemic, long before the pandemic, when Zoom became like very normal for therapy. So I was doing
Yeah.
Skype therapy with people like all over the world, but again, for like $60, $80, which again, I mean, I think it was right for me at the time. I wouldn't recommend that for many people nowadays because it's I think when you have the degrees and the experience, your time is worth more than that. But ultimately, it was just a period of feeling so much loneliness and shame and questioning and really not knowing my worth because I didn't feel at this company that I'd been at, I didn't really feel valued. And I don't blame them because I wasn't really working in my field. So like I probably shouldn't have been working there, honestly. But
Yeah.
like I didn't feel valued in the way that I normally would from my career. I didn't have the connection from friends. I mean, got dating in New York. Like, I know you've been there, girl. Like, that
Yeah.
was a nightmare. I was like, wait, what just happened? Like, I was like, I don't understand what's going on. So, like, I really wanted to give up at that point. There were a lot of times where I thought, should I just go back? But I'd also left my job and I was like, what option do I have? And I think there was a bit of ego involved of like, I still know that I love New York and I still know I need to be here and I just needed to stick it out. And at some point, I do remember probably within the first year, things started to I moved into a different apartment with a great roommate. And, I just started to kind of like get little opportunities here and there. And I started to integrate more into the community. And yeah, things just started to feel better. And so I'd say that was definitely a time where I was like, I don't think I can do this. That was sort of more on, that's, I guess, sort of both personal and professional. So maybe I'll leave that and then I'll also just check in. I can keep going on it, but I know we've only got 8 minutes. So like I'll pass back to you to
Yeah.
see if there's
Yeah.
anything that you want to ask that's more important.
No, I appreciate it. I'm curious if you were to sum up your learning from that experience in one
Yeah.
line, what would it be?
Ooh, let's see. Like in one line, and I don't want to sound cliche, like honestly, like what comes to mind for me is like, don't let your ego get in the way. I think a lot of times too, when people start businesses, and sorry, this is more in like the entrepreneurial realm, but a lot of people think, oh, I've got to like leave my current job and like sit and then I've just got to leave and I'm going to go all into it. And I think there's a world in which there's a lot of times for people where they still have to keep their current jobs and then kind of like do a bit of a side hustle to prove out the concept and like get to a point where they're like, okay, this
Totally.
actually makes sense. Like, I do not recommend that everybody just like leaves their job and like goes after their dreams, right? I think that's again a very privileged mindset that not everybody has. So yeah, so I guess that would be like the summary, is sort of don't let ego kind of get in the way. And then if I can offer another one as well from more of like the psychological piece, like, and this has actually been in, I mentioned again offline, like this has been a really hard year for me in the transition
Yeah.
from New York to Nashville, getting married, and like all the trauma that stirs up, which is obviously opportunities for healing and learning, but like there's a lot there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I lost my mom suddenly, and there's just been, I mean, I've been on a real grief journey with that. But, I will say I've been turning a corner recently, and it actually reminds me of 2015, of that year, because the other sort of one liner I would say is like, there has to be like a progression or regression to the mean, right? Like, or progression, I guess, in this case, right? Like like life, I mean, again, things come together and fall apart and come together and fall apart again. That's my email signature. It's a Pema Chodron quote. And ultimately, like, yeah, life is just always going to have seasons that feel harder and easier and beautiful and perfect and difficult and frustrating and heartbreaking and all the rest. And I think always reminding ourselves when we're in those like really hard periods, like, okay, it's really important still to always check in and make sure that like, you're not deficient in vitamin D or have a thyroid issue or like there's not something going on physiological, because a lot of people come to therapy thinking, oh, it's just mindset work, when actually there is something going on. But if everything is balanced in the body and you're just having a very normal like grief response or response to a transition, or there's just a place that there needs to be some work, just knowing like, yeah, the tide is going to shift at some point. There has to be a progression to the mean. Like, just trust things are hard right now. They're not always going to feel this way. And just don't judge yourself on the process. Like, there is no point in kicking yourself while you're down. And that's where the self-compassion comes in. If you can keep being kind to
Yeah.
yourself, keep acknowledging that like whatever it is that's coming up in a difficult period is teaching you something, it's an opportunity for future resilience or growth or awareness or whatever, then you can just trust in the process more and not fight it so much.
I love it. I mean, that's like where we should end, but I have a couple rapid fire
Yeah,
questions I absolutely have to ask
throw them
you.
at me.
I'm so sorry again about such a
Thank you.
crazy year. And it is a cool reminder that like, I love that. Like, what comes up comes down, what is down goes up. And I'm sure that there's a bunch of people
Totally.
listening who also need to hear that.
Thank you. And I'll just respond. I know we just have a little bit of time, but I will just reflect on that, Lissy, and say, like, thank you for saying that. And also, like, my podcast is called The Failure Factor. And the reason it's named that is because I believe that, like, once we go through these periods of failure and sort of like dark nights of the soul and whatever, we just have even that much more edge. And there's like a failure factor that people who've hit rock bottom have that a lot of people don't experience. And you come out of times like that feeling that much more confident. I mean, assuming, you know, you have the resources to do so, you come out of this feeling more confident, more inspired. Like, I'm finally back in a place where I'm like, I'm ready to write again, you know, like I'm ready to create content again. And it's been a while since I felt that way. And that's because I've come to a place where I'm like, yeah, made it through, feel that much more credible, I suppose, for navigating a challenging year. So back to you.
My gosh. Well, so much there. But I want to make sure I get through these couple last ones. These are like quick sprint questions.
Sure.
So like 30 seconds max on each. You ready?
Hit me.
When's a moment in your life when everything changed? And maybe you didn't realize it at the time.
Oh my gosh, moment in my life where everything changed. I didn't realize it at the time. Well, I mean, I guess it would probably be when I went to New York for the first time. Like, I visited New York for the first time, 2012. I was visiting my brother who lived in Washington, D.C. at the time. And I was just in the beginning of like that heartbreak recovery stage. And I was like, I need to do things out of my comfort zone. So I was like, this seems like something out of my comfort zone. I went there. I met a girlfriend who was in Eastern Canada who flew down to meet me. We had like an amazing weekend. And I was just like, this, I've never felt this way before. This energy, it made me believe in things that I didn't believe in at the time. And and it also, of course, made me obsessed with New York and ultimately caused me to be there.
Whoa. Okay. That's amazing. I love that. These like sparkle moments are wild. What's the best piece of advice that someone's given you?
Okay, I would say, I don't know if I can say best, but one that's definitely come to mind for me right now is just a very classic. My therapist echoed like what's a very well-known quote, which is "Don't go to the hardware store for milk." And I think so many of us, especially when we sort of feel almost like entitled to someone's support, or we expect it, and we can't accept that like there are certain people who just are not going to be able to support us in the way that we want to.
Totally.
And actually a runner up with that too that I just remembered is I had a shaman or shaw woman after a heavy dose of bufo tell me respect their journey, which she just repeated over and over again. And that was so profound for me because, again, as someone who has tendencies toward codependency and wants to like rescue and save everyone and oftentimes thinks they know what's right, I have to constantly remind myself and humble myself and be like, I don't know. I mean, we are all the experts of our own experience, and like however a person is coping, that's their prerogative. And so reminding myself, or her reminding me, to like take a step back and just respect the person's journey rather than trying to like drag them was super helpful, and I think is a helpful one for everyone.
That's a good one. A really good one. Okay. What's a moment from your life that at the time felt ordinary but ended up being extraordinary?
Let's see. These are such great questions. I mean, I think I'll go personal on that one. Like, I'd be remiss not to acknowledge my husband in all of this. I mean, we have had a very tumultuous, colorful, romantic, crazy journey. We've been together on and off for 6 years and have had a couple of like spectacular breakups in that process. And about a little over 2 years ago, we ran into each other at a party after not seeing each other for a year, and had sort of, a loving acknowledgement and embrace and whatever. And was like, okay, cool. Well, great to see him, but I can't imagine there's much that's changed there. And now we're married. So
that's so good. You never know.
You never know.
You never know. Last one. What are like 3 things that you personally do to take care of your mental fitness?
Yeah.
On a regular basis?
So I'm not always the best at this, but I do try to prioritize sleep. For me, I know for sure that is honestly like the most important thing.
Yeah.
I'm not a great sleeper. I have ADHD, and I am just a very sensitive person. And so I find that even like if I go a couple nights, honestly, even one night where I don't get great sleep. And by the way, I'm not saying like 9 hours here. I'm just saying like I need to get 7 hours, of not straight through or anything like that, but something like that to feel good. So sleep is a huge one. Exercise is a huge part of my mental health. That has been a real journey just because in eating disorder recovery, we have to be really mindful about how we're using exercise. And while it's helpful for me for regulating my nervous system, I certainly have had histories of not having the best relationship to exercise. So it took me a long time to get to a place where like movement feels really good and it's not coming from like a punching place, but I do try to get some kind of movement every day. And it doesn't have to be super intense. Like it's just, I have a walking treadmill that I'll like do emails on, or like go to a Pilates class or go to a yoga class. Like it's all pretty low key. And let's see. I mean, there's so many things that I do for my mental health. Honestly, I could give you a list of 10 things, but I'm trying to think of the top three. So like sleep, exercise. And I think the third one I would say is social connection. Like it's so easy to isolate, especially when we're not feeling great. And that is where like shame wants you to hide, right? Like shame is like, yeah, like nobody loves you. Hide, don't talk to anyone. And if you're in that place, I actually suggest for people who are like in a place where they're like, I just can't even like reach out. Honestly, something that's very supportive for me is Reddit. And I know that like people have all sorts of thoughts about that, but I think Reddit is like the most incredible community where people are so open about their experience,
Totally.
and you can really feel connected to anyone. And there's again, it's not egoic like other forms of social media. So I think if you're in a place where you're like, I can't reach out to anyone, I just can't deal with like that extra step or like the confrontation of like being one-on-one, then start with like communities, like online communities where you can help alleviate some of that shame. And then yes, I think like really trying to push yourself to like, even if it's doing something with someone where you're not talking, like it's like, if it is like, I'm going to play tennis with somebody or like go for the hike or go to the movie or whatever it is, but just trying to be around others that feel safe to you. I mean, we're social beings. We're meant to be social beings. Some of us have bigger social cups than others. And I think it's important to know what size yours is and like how to fill that. But just being sensitive to know when like, if you're starting to spiral into that more like shame, depression place, it may be because you just need to have like a call with a friend who makes you feel that oxytocin in your veins. Like it's literally like when you're like, oh, your
Yeah.
voice, oh my gosh, everything feels better. I can feel my nervous system regulating. So yeah, so I'd say those are
Love
the top
it.
three.
Amazing, amazing. Well,
Oh
Megan, I could literally talk to you for 12 lifetimes.
my
This
gosh,
is
me too.
so, so, so special to get some of your time. One of my most favorite humans, really.
Yay,
And really
likewise.
cool to also learn a bit more of your story. Thank you for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure to have you. We will make sure that we put a lot of the things that you mentioned in the show notes.
Great.
But where can people find you? You mentioned Forbes.
Yeah, so I mean I write fairly regularly for Forbes, so you can just find, I mean, I guess I would just Google my name in Forbes. I don't know what the exact link is there, but my website is meganbruneau.com. So that's just my first name, last name.com, MEGAN, B as in boy, RUN as in Nancy, E as in echo, AU.com. And the same thing for my Instagram is Megan J Bruneau. So again, MEGAN JBRUNEAU. You can find me on LinkedIn. I think I still have like a Facebook page. I got kicked off of Twitter for some unknown reason. I think I got hacked, so I'm not on there anymore. And I have dreams to aspire to go on TikTok, but not anytime soon, probably. So, and yes, I have a podcast called The Failure Factor, which I've not released an episode for a year because it's been a rough year, but I'm actually like really leaning into it for January and hired a marketing person and whatnot. So like we're gonna get going with that. So yeah,
Go.
come find me if you want to work with me. If you want to work with someone on my team, I have 2 coaches who are also trained therapists who are amazing and taking clients. And I have a book that is on Amazon called How to Be Alone and Together, 72 Lessons on Being at Peace with Yourself. And yeah, it's like a fun little, just tons of different little wisdom quotes and whatnot and write-ups about that to just remind you that our emotions are part of being human and things are constantly changing. And it's like kind of spiritual wisdom, similar to what I've shared here, but less fast talking and probably more swear words.
Love it. We love swear words too here, Megan.
Great.
Thank you so, so much. And we look forward to tuning into our next interview with our next guest. Thank you,
Yay.
everyone.
Thank you.
Yay.